In this video tutorial, we're going to go over how to set up a third-person camera and control in Unreal 5.2 from a completely blank and empty project. In previous versions of Unreal, the axis and action mappings found in the project settings were used to set up input and controls, but that is now deprecated and will be removed in future versions of Unreal. So in this video, we'll be covering the enhanced input actions and input mapping context, which is the new way of setting up key and input actions in the newer versions of Unreal 5. To begin, I'm going to create a games project and a completely blank project here, and I'm going to call it player input tutorial and click create. So once we have our new project created, we're going to go to File, New Level, and just create a basic level. So we have a very empty scene here, and we'll create a folder. So in our content, I'm going to right click and create a new folder called Character, just to store our stuff for now, to keep it a bit organized. And in our character folder, we're going to create a new blueprint, which is going to be our character or the thing that we're going to control. So we're going to right click, we're going to go to Blueprint Class, and we're going to select a character. So the character is a pawn that includes the ability to walk around. So we're just going to create that character blueprint, and we're going to call it BP underscore character. And now we have our character, and we're going to open up that blueprint. And in our blueprint, we have a couple things that it starts us off with, like this capsule component for collisions. We're going to add a camera. So that's a camera that we're going to view through. And then on our mesh, our character mesh, we're going to go in here and select a skeletal mesh. You can load in whatever character you have, but I'm just going to load in the skeletal cube. So it's just a cube as a default. And now we're going to move our camera a bit further back because this is what we're going to be viewing our character through. And then that cube, I'm going to click on it and scale it up a bit so it's a more proper size, and I'll move it to the center of that capsule component. Something like that should be good. And once we have that, we now have our character starting to get set up. So I'll compile this, make sure it checks out, that there's no errors. I'll save this, and we're good. Now the problem is if I click play right now, we get to move our scene around through our camera. We can just float around and look with the mouse. And that's going to be a bit of a problem because we want to not spawn from a default position or from wherever we currently are with just our floating camera. We want to spawn with this BP or blueprint character, so it spawns the actual cube, and we're looking through that camera that we have defined in here, right behind the cube. So to do that, we have to create a new game mode. So to create a new game mode, we're going to go up here to this little drop down, and we're going to go to game mode, and we're going to go create and select game mode, but we'll be creating a new one, and we're going to call it maybe something like, it doesn't really matter what we call it, but perhaps I'll just call it main game mode. And we'll click save, and now it opens this kind of blueprint editor up, and this is our new game mode. We leave everything as is, like default, but you can see here on the right hand side, if you're selected on the game mode here under classes, the default pawn class is default pawn, and that's why we spawn from our camera and just fly around and can move around, but we're not actually spawning our character or our cube. So what we're going to have to do here is change this default pawn class to BP underscore character. Now it's going to spawn our character. So we'll click compile, we'll click save, we'll take one last look at our character, make sure that we have this camera far back enough so you get a good view of the full cube, so maybe something like that. And if we try this out, we click play, there we go, we see the cube here get spawned. And we can't control anything. If I move the mouse, nothing happens. If I press the arrow keys or WASD, I don't move at all. So now we're successfully spawning our character, looking through the camera that's attached to it, but we don't have any way of controlling this. So that's the next thing that we're going to have to set up. And maybe I need to move that camera a little bit lower because we see a little bit too high over the cube. Let's try it again. Play. There we go. That's a bit better. So now we want to get some input from our keyboard, from our mouse, and actually control our scene a bit with that, or control this cube a bit with that. So to do that, what we're going to have to do is create a input mapping context. So we're going to right click here and go to input and create an input mapping context. So this is going to receive input from our keys, or this is where we're going to set up our keys that we're going to press. So I'm going to call it IMC underscore IMC for input mapping context. And then maybe I can just call it IMC underscore main. So whoops, IMC underscore main. There we go. And if we open up this input mapping context, you can see here we have mappings that we can add. So I'm going to add a mapping. Now you can choose a key here. It says none right now for the group that it's in, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but this is the keys that you're going to be able to press. And you can go down here and click on this list and find the key that you want. Or another thing you can do is just press this keyboard button and then press the key you want to add into here. So A or W. So I can add my keys that way. So W, A, S, and D. And there we go. We have all our movement keys: forward, left, right, and back. W is forward, A is going to be left, S is going to be S is going to be back, and D is going to be right. So there we go. We have all our keys. And now that we have those keys, we have to have a group for them. These are the keys we're going to have to press, but it's going to, when we press those keys, it's going to pass it on along as a certain bit of information. And that's going to be defined by our input action that will go here. And right now, if I try to save this, it'll throw me a bunch of errors because you can't have this set to none or empty. So we have to create an input action. So I'm going to right click here and go to input and create a input action. And I'm going to call it IA for input action underscore movement. And that's going to capture our movement here. And that's why I'm going to put it in this group here. So on this group now, I'll drop it down and add that input action movement. And now I can save this. Now our input action movement is going to take those key presses and turn it into some sort of data. And by default, it's set to digital Boolean. So is it true? Is it false? Is it pressed? Is it not? What we're going to actually set it to is an axis 2D because we're mapping 4 keys to this. W for forward, S for back, A for left, D for right. And axis 2D has 2 axes, up, down, left, right. It's like a grid. Positive values going forward, negative values going back. Positive values going to the right, negative values going to the left. That makes sense for controlling our movement. So we're going to set the value to an axis 2D, and that's going to give me 2 directionals of movement, forward, back, left, and right. So I'm going to use that. Now what we're going to have to do is we have to set up our actual input in our blueprint in our character so we can actually capture that input and do something. So for that, we're going to go in our BP underscore character. We're going to go to our event graph tab. On our event begin play, when the game starts playing, we're going to make sure that it adds our mapping context, the keys that we're going to be pressing. So we're going to go here from event begin play. We're going to drag it out and do cast to player controller. The object, we're going to get controller. And then we're going to take as player controller here and do our enhanced input local player system. And then from there, we're going to check to make sure that's valid. So we'll do is valid under utilities here. And if that is all valid, then we'll add our mapping context. So add mapping. If you don't see it pop up, just turn off this context sensitive, and there it is, add mapping context. And we'll choose our mapping context IMC underscore main. Now we've added our mapping context for our buttons. Now we have to do some sort of action when those buttons are pressed. So we'll right click and use our event that we set up, IA underscore movement, which captures movement from those keys, W, A, S, and D, and maps them to a 2D axis, forward, back, left, and right. So we'll add that event, IA underscore movement. When it is pressed, or when those keys are triggered or pressed, we'll have to do something. And what we're going to do is make our player move. So to do that, we're going to add movement input when they're triggered. So we'll do add movement input. And then we'll set the world direction. So we'll do left and right, forward and back. So for the world direction, we'll get the right vector. Whoops. So I'm going to go back here. I think I pressed the wrong thing. World direction, get right vector. There it is. So we're getting the right direction, or right vector, the direction that goes to the right. And what we're going to do is we want to connect up only two axes, only X and Z. And right now they're all combined. So if we want to split these out, you can right click and do split structured pin. And there we go. We get individual control to them. So we're going to connect that up to a get control rotation. Same thing. We're going to have to right click, split this, and we're going to connect up X and Z. And then our scale value, so positive for right, negative for left, that has to go to our axes. So when we capture that input from our keys, it's either going to go to those two different axes, which we'll set up. But to access those axes individually, it's going to be under this action value. And right now it's all combined. So if I right click on this action value and do split, you'll get X and Y, or those two different axes on our key presses separately. So we'll use the X axis. So I'll take this out, I'll put it into a reroute to keep this organized, and I'll connect that to our scale value. There we go. Maybe I'll just organize this a little bit more so it's not crazy. So you could see everything. Maybe I'll add a reroute here as well, just to clean that up a bit. Okay, so there we go. Now we have our left and right movement. So we're going to get the right vector, and then we'll use the value here that we're mapping. So if it's positive, it goes right. If it's negative, it goes left. And we'll compile this, make sure there's no errors. Okay, there's an error. What is our error? If we take a look down here, target must have a connection. So one thing you might want to take a look at, and this actually gets me a bunch of times in Unreal, so I'm glad it actually happened. As you can see here, it says target is controller. I don't want that. I want target is pawn. So when you create nodes like get control rotation, you might see multiple ones. Make sure you choose the one that's correct. And I want to have the one that says target is pawn, not target is controller. So you can see how there's two of the duplicate same thing. One target is controller, the other one target is pawn. I want the target is pawn. So be a little bit careful with that with blueprints. It gets tricky. Sometimes you can end up selecting the wrong thing. Now if I compile this, there's no error here. Now the error is over there. And there's an error there because again, target is enhanced. Okay, so this is all good. The only problem is I need to connect target here to this, to our enhanced input local player subsystem, and then compile. Okay, now we're all good. So once we have that, we'll save. We'll close this. We'll click play. There's our cube. If I press A, it moves right. If I press D, it moves right. Both buttons move it right. And that's because I haven't done anything in my input mapping context to make the A button press go negative. Everything's just giving positive values. So in my input mapping context underscore main, I'm going to go to our A button press, and I'm going to add a modifier. And that modifier is going to be negate. So it does the opposite. It'll go negative values, whereas the D key will stay default and give positive values. And now if I save that and click play, when I press D, it goes to the right. When I press A, it goes to the left. So now that's all working. So now we have left and right movement. We capture our keys in our input mapping context. We have a group input action movement, which takes those inputs and binds them to an axis 2D. And currently it's pretty much just the x-axis, left and right. And our A button is giving us negative values and our D button is giving us positive values. So that allows our player to move. So now we have that all set up. Now we just have to do the same thing for forward and back, which is what we're going to do next. Now for forward and back, we go back to our input mapping context, and we're going to deal with W and S. W for forward, S for back. But we want to get the either axis now, not the x-axis, the y-axis. So what we're going to do is add a modifier, which will be a swizzle input axis values. So now we get the other axis, and that's good for a W. It'll move forward. And then for back, for S, same thing. We'll add a modifier to swizzle input axis values to get the other axis. And then we'll add another modifier, which will be negate, because we want to go backwards with the S key. We want to give negative values with the S key. So there we go. We've set those up now, and then we have to add our blueprint for forward and back. So same as what we have here, this is left and right, we'll just add on to it. And what we'll add on to it is pretty much, let's see, I'm going to give a bit more room here. We'll add another movement input. Connect that up like that. And we will do the same kind of thing, but this time we'll use the Y value. So I'll connect that to a reroute. Let's keep this kind of clean. We'll put that for the scale value. And then the direction is it's going to be get forward vector instead of get right vector. So we're getting forward and back. We'll split our structured pin here, and we'll connect only the other axis that we want to control, which is Z. In this case, we don't have Y or any need for Y at all. So we'll connect that up like that. And that's really it. And if I compile this, and we save this, and we close this and click play, A goes left, D goes right, W goes forward, S goes back. Now we have full movement of our cube. Now what about camera control? What if I want to move the mouse and pan that camera around this cube? So it's like a proper third person control setup. Well, that's the next thing we're going to do. We're going to get mouse input and have it control our camera. So for mouse look controls, again, we just go back to our input mapping context. Now what we'll do is create another mapping or another action mapping. And this will create another input action for, but first we'll just set up the mouse control. So instead of the keyboard here, what I'm going to do is click down here and go to mouse. You can do mouse XY. Easiest way is just to do mouse XY 2D axis in both directions. So there we go. Mouse XY 2D axis. And then what we're going to do is right click in our content browser, go to input and add input action, call it IA underscore, I don't know, what should we call it for mouse movement? Maybe something like IA underscore mouse. It doesn't really matter what we call it, but we just have to have something for it. So I'm just going to call it IA underscore mouse or IA underscore, actually, you know what? IA underscore look would be better for looking around. So input action look, and then I'll set this here to IA look, and we'll save this. And then in our input action look, what kind of data do we want to store it to? Not a Boolean, but to an axis 2D. Again, with the mouse, it's the same thing. Two axes. You move the mouse left, right, up, down. That's really all you can do with it. So that makes sense. Now for the mouse controls, one direction has to go back, one direction has to go forward. So what we're going to do is on the IA underscore look in our input mapping context here, we have our mouse XY 2D axis. And if we go to modifiers, we have nothing right now, but we're going to add one that will be negate. Now, how does that work? We're going to negate only in a certain axis. So we can set it to negate, and then we can open this up. And right now it affects X, Y, and Z. We only want it to affect Y. Now that we have our mouse input all set up, we're going to have to add it to our blueprint in our character. So BP character, we're going to open it back up. We're going to go to our event graph, and we're going to do our mouse input. So I'm going to right click IA underscore look. That's our input action for look. And what we're going to do is under triggered, we'll add controller. So there's pitch and there's yaw for our mouse. So we'll first do maybe add controller yaw input and then add controller pitch input. And then for the values, we'll connect that to our action value, which will just split again, same as we did with our movement. So X value will be our yaw and Y value will be our pitch. And that's it. We'll compile that, save that. Now the problem is our camera's not parented to anything. It's just kind of floating here. So we're going to go back to our viewport on our BP character. We're going to leave our camera as is, but we're going to add something that will allow us to anchor our character to, or anchor our camera to our character. So we're going to add a spring arm. And if we search spring arm, there it is. And we want this the other way around. I want my camera underneath the spring arm. And if we click on spring arm, you can see it here. It's this little red line. I'm going to align the camera, kind of looking from that red line like that. And then we can compile and save this. And if we click play now, we have our box. We can move it left, right, forward, back. Now, if I move the mouse, I can move the mouse left and right, but up and down isn't doing anything. So why is that happening? Well, one thing we have to be careful of when setting this up is in our blueprint character, underneath our spring arm, you want to take a look at the details on the right-hand side here. And in our details, you're going to find an option called Use Pawn Control Rotation under Camera Settings, and we want that. And if we enable that and then compile and save, now when I click play, I can move my camera left, right, and up and down. So now I have my mouse that I can fully move around the cube or the character. And I can still move forward, back, left, and right with my keyboard keys. And I can rotate the mouse and reorient the character to face a different direction. So we kind of have our movement now. Now, if we want to change this up a bit, maybe it'd be nice to have our cube rotate towards the direction that's moving towards. So if I press A or D, its front rotates. So it's not just perfectly strafing, but it's turning and moving in that direction or looking in that direction. To do something like that, we can open up our blueprint character here. We can go to BP underscore character. We can take a look at our details. And I think under, if I just collapse all these, there's a lot of drop downs here. But under pawn, we should be able to find a couple options. I'm going to take a look at where this could be. I might just search it because there's just a lot of things here. I think we're almost close. This will pretty much show everything when you click on that very topmost node. So it can be hard to navigate through. I could probably just search this, but I was hoping I could find what group it's in. Should be here, pawn. So under pawn, you'll find these options: use controller rotation pitch, use controller rotation yaw. I'm going to turn both those off so it won't angle our character when we move the mouse. And then what I can do is go under character movement here, and under character movement settings, let's see, there it is, character movement rotation settings. I can orient rotation to movement so the cube faces the direction it's moving towards. And now I'll compile and save. And you know what? I'm going to move this camera a bit further back. So I'm going to take that spring arm and make its target arm length maybe something like 500. So it sets it longer or farther away, or maybe 600. And compile and save that. And if I click play now, we see our cube. A moves left, and look at that. The cube faces the direction it's moving towards. D, A, forward, back. And if I move my mouse now, it doesn't actually move the character. it just pans around the character or around this cube. So now we kind of have some full control and movement. If I hold W or forward and then move the mouse, then it moves in those directions. But if I'm still and not pressing any button, I just rotate on my mouse, I just rotate around the character. And if I face a direction like that way and press W, then the character moves to that direction and then starts moving. So we've kind of set up a pretty much a very simple third-person camera and character movement in not too long of an amount of time, going over the new input mapping context and the input actions in Unreal 5.2. So that's really how you can set up controls. You want more controls, you just add them into your input mapping context and then add a input action for the event that will capture those key presses and how it will store them, whether it's a Boolean like a true or false, or whether it's a 2D axis where you have positive and negative in two different directions. Is really up to you how you want to handle that input. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it, and this is not the only way. This is just kind of the most simplest way. Pretty much this is how all the sample projects are driven in Unreal, and you can take apart any projects and see how they're done, but this is all the steps that you'd have to do to pretty much recreate simple third-person character and camera movement in Unreal 5.2. If you found this video useful or you learned something new, make sure to like, subscribe, comment down below on what you'd like to see next for content or tutorials or whatever you're wondering about. And check out the Discord, check out the Patreon. If you are part of the Patreon, you will also get access to the PDF for this video, which goes over all the steps covered in this video and a little bit more information as well. So you can definitely check that out if you're part of the Patreon. If not, take a look at it in the description below, and don't forget to let me know what kind of content or tutorials you'd like to see next.